Okay, so you should be able to see the slides now.
Yes, sir.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay, so just to quickly recap what we did on Monday last, we looked at the boundary representation, and the problem that we were discussing in the class the other day was the fact that our intent is to define a set of points occupied by a closed bound object, which is a solid. But we don't actually describe the points, we describe a subset of those points, namely the bounding surface. Okay, when I say a subset of the point set, we were only attempting to capture it by representing the bounding surface, right? And this is sort of an indirect way, and therefore there are some problems that can happen. And therefore we said that the surface model or the bounding surface must satisfy the following conditions, namely that it must be a closed bounding surface, orientable surface and non-self-intersecting surface. Non-self-intersecting is rather obvious, I thought. Orientable, we saw examples of it, that as you traverse a closed path along the boundary, the notion of material containment must not change. Meaning, if you started with material at your feet, then all the way through your journey, the material must continue to be at your feet. And likewise, a closed path, meaning that you must be able to trace a closed path. There should not be any break, right? And while these are definitions for validity of a bounding surface, the checks actually, these are not good checks. You cannot keep checking that, the containment direction does not change while you're traversing a closed path, because this must be true for all possible paths. And therefore, it's not a good way to check. But fortunately, we have some simple checks, as some of your colleagues pointed out themselves. For the closed bounding surface, we just have to check that each edge in the bounding surface model is incident on exactly two faces, meaning it is part of only two faces. Orientable, again, the same edge that is part into the two faces is traversed in opposite directions in each of the face. We saw these examples, right, where this edge is traversed in this direction in one face and in this direction in one face. If that happens, then the orientation is consistent, pointing away from the material. But the last one, that non-self-intersection, where we say that the edges in the boundary model must only intersect faces must intersect only at edges, and edges must intersect only at vertices. This is something that can only be verified by actually intersecting and comparing. And therefore, we concluded that the bounding surface or the boundary representation, as we call it, is not a easy thing to work with, because you have to constantly keep checking this validity condition. Let me just continue then, before I stop to ask for questions. Just two pictures I wanted to flash. I think one we had seen in the last class itself, a typical boundary representation structure for a simple part like a square pyramid, right? But the point we made in the last class was that even to define or create the boundary representation, right? Mind you, this is the representation of our solid, right? So this represents our solid, right? Solid lists a bunch of faces, and that connects to a list of edges, and that connects to a list of vertices, and that finally connects to a list of the coordinates. And that's the sequence you see here, right? My solid has a list of 6 faces, or 5 faces, sorry, and a list of 8 edges and 5 vertices. The 6th one is not there. Okay. And so that's the second point about the boundary representation or creation of the boundary representation of a part. As you can appreciate, right? You have to start by creating 5 vertices, connecting them in pairs to form the 8 edges, and then connecting them in rings to form these faces, right? So which means that you have 5 plus 8, 13 plus 5, 18 inputs to be given to create a part which is a square pyramid, right? Sorry, I went too fast. one additional thing that we had not looked at in the description so far of the boundary representation, which is that I can have parts with holes or cuts made in them, right? Because all the examples that we had done hitherto was the brick, but it turns out that the same representation scheme works for the a part with a brick with a hole in it, except that, right, I have my solid, which is my list of faces, right? So F1 to whatever number that we have here. So maybe F10, that's the number of faces in this, right? The only difference being that if this was to be F1, right, one of the faces in this instance, or two of the faces in this instance, will have not just one ring of edges, but two rings of edges. Okay. And they will be consistently oriented to be, consistent with the normals that we want, and therefore these edges are oriented like that, and so I'll label them as E1, E2, E3, and E4. And the inner one, right, again, when you traverse it, the material must be to its left, and therefore its traversal will be like this. And so I will label this as E13, E14, E15, and E16. Okay. So there is nothing in the representation of the solid that prevents you from representing objects like these. These incidentally are called multiply connected objects, right? What it means is that there are faces whose boundary is not one ring, but multiple rings. Okay. That's the only thing it means. Where it is only one ring, it is called simply connected. When it is multiple rings, it is multiply connected. That's the thing that you need to keep in mind, right? But sometimes to sort of ease the construction or the representation schema, a new structure or new entity is introduced, as shown in this example here, right? That each face is in turn a list of loops, right? In this case, phase 1 would have been a list of two loops, L1 and L2. And L1 will then point to its ring of edges, and L2 will point to its ring of edges, E13 to E16. This will be E1 to E4. Like this example here, the phase 1, which is the phase that is shown to you here, has three loops, the outer one, the two inner ones. And by convention, loop 1 will always be the outer loop, outermost loop. Okay. And therefore, in this case, it starts from wherever it has to start. Oh, these people have followed a different convention. Have they done it right? E13 is here. So this must be the one. Okay. So loop 1 is the outermost one. So E9, E10, E11, E12, E13, E14. Okay. So the traversal is in this direction, right? And therefore, the convention is that the material is always to the left. And then the other two loops will have a traversal in this direction, and that will fix that. Okay. So that's as an addition to account for multiply connected objects, but together this constitutes the boundary representation now for multiply connected objects. Okay. So the BREP, as represented here or in the previous slide for the simply connected object, in some sense is complete, meaning it's a complete representation. You can do whatever manipulation you want of the solid with this representation, right? You can draw the object because you have all the faces and the normals, right? You can cut it and find the chopped object on either side. That's again possible, right? So all the information that you need to do any reasonable manipulation is available with the boundary representation. But 2 points that we have to keep in mind. One, that it is cumbersome and bulky, right? Really, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that for a simple part like a square pyramid, I need 18 operations, right? I mean, and 18 pieces of information to store, right? And so that's the problem with the thing. And the second part is that even after building this, it has to go through the validity checks. So even if you were to go through and put together the 18 operations to build the boundary model, you have to then go back and go through the validity checks. Now, the two of the validity checks are easy. The closed and the orient table, there is no much effort involved and you can easily do this. There is no problem. But the one that involves the check for whether the surface is self-intersecting or not, as we said, involves intersections. So in this particular example, there were 5 faces, right? Which means 5 into 4, 20, so 10 intersections, right? And there were how many edges? 8 edges, right? So that's 28 intersections. And that's only for the simple part like a square pyramid. And so we concluded that based on these two observations, that A, you have to put in too much effort in defining this, and B, even after defining this, there is a lot of effort involved in ensuring that what you have defined represents the valid solid, that we cannot allow or we cannot expect the designer or the person who is modeling the part to construct the boundary representation ab initio. This is not possible. Or rather, I should not say possible, but feasible, right? It's not a convenient option for the user. Okay, so I'll just stop here for a minute and check if there are any questions. So anybody has any questions? Any comments, questions? Okay, so if there are no questions, then we will go on to see what can be done about this. Okay, so what is the situation now? We have a good representation. It is able to represent everything that we need for or from the solid model, representation of the solid, but it is not easy to construct. And so we focus on a construction technique. Okay. And so let's move down. Oh, sorry, there is another picture to tell you this. Maybe I'll come back to this later when I do the solid model, and I'll come back. All right. Oops, sorry. The objective now, as I said, is that we need to be able to construct the information that we need for my boundary representation, right? So the same distinction that we encountered during the curve, the surface, the trimmed surface now comes back again for the solid, where I want a different means to construct and a different thing to store. So storage, we have decided that we're going to store it as a boundary representation. That's going to be my representation. But how do we construct it? Right? I don't want to construct the boundary representation directly. I want to construct or define whichever way is convenient to me, and I would expect the system to then, extract or construct this boundary representation. So the analog was that we had this sweep operation here, and then finally here we got the spline surface. Right? We had the endpoints and the tangents here, and we got the curve. Right? So that's the analog that we have encountered so far. Now, what is the entity here? The entity here, actually it turns out is quite straightforward, as you can see from this picture that has already been exposed to you. goes back from your, building sets and the mechano sets and all the old toys, where the idea would be that you build complex objects by combining simple shapes. That's the essential idea. Okay. And so the idea then is that my simple shape, I have some point set information, a boundary representation, for example, and I combine them to get a complex shape. So for example, here in 2D, we have shown two rectangles as two different point sets. The hatched one will obviously be behind the B as well, but B is overlaid on this. And if I do an operation called A minus B, meaning I remove the point set B from the point set A, then I get something that looks like this, which could be like a square with a hole, right? And that's the idea. Or alternately, I could have positioned my B somewhat differently, right? So this is A and this is B, and then I instruct or express the desire that the set be the union of A and B, and then I get a block like that. Okay, so that's the idea, that I would like to combine simple point sets to make more complex shapes, right? And the combination we borrow from the algebra of sets that we learned in high school, right? Because these are also point sets. Therefore, the combinations would follow the Boolean algebra that we learned, where I can have a union of two sets, an intersection of two sets, or a difference of two sets. So you have seen the example of the difference, and you've seen the example of the union, and we can draw up an example for intersection, but we will see one slightly later. So that's the idea, the basic idea behind providing a better way to construct the boundary representation is that we allow the user to pick simple point sets for which the boundary representation is already known, and we allow the user to combine them to get more complex shapes. Right? So this example is in 2D, but presumably this will also work in 3D. I hope I have a sketch in the next picture. No, I don't. So I'll have to draw one. So let me do that here on the side. But there are examples below as well. So let's take a block, right? And stick another block here, right? And stick a cylinder here. Okay, somewhere in the middle of this edge. And so I call this A, this B, and this C. These are all point sets, right? And I give the instruction to the computer that I'm interested in A union B minus C. And hopefully, if everything goes well, you should get an L bracket with a cylindrical slot. Okay, so that's the idea. And just a quick comparison of why this is attractive means or method to do the design. You have picked three primitives or three shapes, sorry, and maybe you have to spend some effort in locating them. So let's say three more operations to locate these primitives correctly, right, relative to each other. Otherwise, it will not work. And then two operators have to be picked. Two operators have to be chosen. That's all the input that is coming from the user to define an object like this. And so you can see that this is, a far superior way to construct a solid model compared to directly trying to construct the boundary representation. See, if you count the vertices, the edges, and the faces, and then the intersections that have to be done to ensure that it is non-self-intersecting, you will realize that this wins big time. Okay, so that's the paradigm. And now for some notations. So these simple shapes, right, that are listed here we call them as primitives, right? And these primitives, two of them are obvious to you, right? These are the two. Now it turns out that when this was first developed, right, this whole modeling paradigm was first developed, these were the only two shapes that were considered as the simple shapes, right? A cuboid and a cylinder. Can you tell me why? Can anyone guess why these were the only two considered and everybody thought that these two will do the trick as far as representing complex shapes are concerned? Any thoughts, guesses? I mean, this is not something that you are expected to know, but I would like you to spend a minute thinking about why these two shapes would do the trick for you. Any thoughts? Anybody? Otherwise, I'll have to use Deval's trick and, call random people. Just make sure that the people who are showing up here are there. Any thoughts? Nobody wants to venture? Okay. So it turns out that this whole work started with a contract from a company, Eastman Kodak, that would make, and Xerox, sorry, that would make office automation equipment, right? So they would make these cameras, these Xerox machines, copiers, etc. And when they went through the bill of materials for the typical products that these companies were making, they came up with a very remarkable observation that greater than 85% of the parts, right, could be formed by the combination of these two. So in some sense, this was backed up by data, right? But the reason I ask you this question is that you did not even need this experimental study to be done to guess that these two would do the trick most of the time. And the answer to that is the fact that till the 70s, early 80s, right, when the CNC machine had not yet strongly taken foothold in most manufacturing sectors, there were two main, metal removal machines that were available to the setup, the manufacturing setup. A milling machine and a lathe, right? A milling machine can only produce planar faces, right, of the type here, and a lathe can only produce axisymmetric parts of the type here. And that is why, right, it was no surprise that most parts that would have been in vogue at that time would have to be made either by milling or lathe, and therefore their surfaces would either be planar or cylindrical, and which is why 85% of the parts could be made using the block and the cylinder. Okay. Of course, later, people kept adding more primitives just to make life easy for the modeling person. And so you started seeing primitives such as a wedge, right, a fillet, right, and so forth, right? Sphere, a torus, so these became added to the list of primitives. Okay. Now, the main thing to keep in mind is that the model that you have created here, A union B minus C, this is my model. Right? This is the model that the user has constructed. He has created A, he has created B, he has created C, positioned them as they want, as he wants or she wants, and then instructed that this is my representation of the part. My part that I'm interested in, S, is equal to A union B minus C. So this is a model, but a model that does not contain the details. It does not contain the vertices, the edges, or the faces of the part that finally I'm interested in. Rather, it tells me the procedure to construct that model, which is why we call it a procedural model. right? And typically today, right, and actually even when it started, the way this would be represented for the computer to be able to process and create the entity of interest to you. Maybe I should go this way. Okay, is the following, that I store my primitive A, right, and my primitive B, and say that these two have to be combined by union operation. And then I define a primitive C and say that the result of this union operation and this primitive must be subtracted. And then I get my solid of interest. Okay. Now, if you look at it the other way around, this looks like the root. And then, you have branches ending with the leaves at the end. So, this has the look and feel of a tree. But computer scientists, being computer scientists, sort of, invert it and put the root at the top and the leaves at the bottom. Okay. And that's how they represent a tree, right? The final result, which is my root, is at the top, and the leaves are the terminal entities at the bottom. Right? And so my model, the procedural model, gets represented in computing parlance as a tree, where the leaves, which means the end nodes, are typically always primitives, right? A, B, and C. The intermediate nodes, right, are my operators, the union, the difference, maybe even intersection. And the final solid rests at the root of the tree, right? So, the tree is also inverted in some sense, root it as the top and the leaves are at the bottom. And because this procedural model is procedural, it tells you how to construct a solid model or a solid geometry. That's the name given to this tree. And so you will see this thing called as a CSG tree or CSG modeling, constructive solid geometry modeling. Okay. So essentially, this is how the problem of constructing or providing ease to the modeling person in representing or defining the solid to the computer is addressed by this system. Right now, the primitives, as I said, are essentially started out with just the two here, a rectangular cuboid or a cylinder. But then later we added a cube, which is a no-brainer, but a wedge, a sphere, a torus, a cone, even a fillet, which is not here. And people could just keep adding primitives that were of interest to them, right? Now, I'm operating without my mouse. I'm a little handicapped. Yeah. So here is an example where, somewhat similar to the one I took, but it has only two parts here, but it shows you all the three operations now, right? So you have your primitive A and your primitive B, and you locate them relative to each other the way you want, right? Presumably, the most sensible or the typical part that you may want is this, which corresponds to the operation A minus B, right? You subtract B from A. But of course, set algebra, those of you who remember it, know that the other way is also possible. I can subtract A from B as well, in which case I get this object here. This is, of course, the union operation, and this is an example of the outcome of the intersection. Okay, so if you are interested in creating any of these shapes, then these become the procedural model of these respective parts. Okay, you still don't have the BREP, but these are the procedural models corresponding to the thing. And this is how the tree looks like for the part that I originally did, except that here the hole is in the middle of the part, but we kept it at the corner. But this is what the tree looks like. Right? You start with two primitives, right? You do a union, and then from the union you subtract this hole, which is the difference operation, and that gives you the representation of the object. Okay. So clearly, as you can see, we made this argument there also, right? So there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 operations, plus there is 3 more operations in locating these correctly, right? You must size them correctly and locate them correctly with respect to each other to get this shape, right? Because you cannot keep the plate here and the cylinder here and say A minus B. Then A minus B will be nothing, right? You will get A back because B is far away. It does not have any connection with A. And so there is an effort involved. So you have these 3 plus 2, 5 plus 3 more operations in sizing and locating these, and that constitutes your input. And so this becomes very attractive in some sense to do this definition or input of the solid model this way, construct the solid model this way. Okay. And as you can see, you can start doing very fancy things with more primitives. So here you have a block and a cylinder, right? Unfortunately, here we have not placed them correctly, but I hope from the result you can make out how it has been placed. If I may, I'll just see if I can draw it here, right? So I'm sure you can guess this, but the cylinder has been placed here. And the sizing is also not obvious to you, but that's where the cylinder has been placed. And therefore, when you do the union, you get this kind of a shape, right? Likewise, on the other branch here, you start with a wedge and another cylinder. In this case, the cylinder is kept somewhere over the center here, running through, right? And then you do a difference operation and you get this complex looking hole on the wedge, right? And then you take these two, and this operation is the intersection operation, and therefore you get the part that is common to both. And so the back is flat, the front is tapered off, and the common pieces are shown. And so that's the result that you're interested in. Okay. So another example just to show that with some planning and effort, you can, create fairly complex parts. Okay. So one last point before we go on to the next question with CSG modeling, right, is that the CSG tree, as I said, has these 3 sort of primitives and the union and the operations that need to go with it. But there is one more piece which is not shown here, and I want to introduce that right now. Right? See, the whole premise here is that I start with simple shapes, and I hope you agree that these shapes are reasonably simple. Right? We have not tried to represent a cylinder so far, but we have represented cuboids, and we can do that. And so when I say the part is simple, the primitive is a simple shape, what it also means is that I have its BREP available with me. Okay, meaning that the boundary representation of the simple shapes are available. And the way I can support that, or I can say that this is easy for us to do, is to define these primitives, right? So let me just draw this cuboid. So if this is X and that is Y and the top is Z, right? So they all are defined at the origin. Now my drawing is not true, but of unit cube. So though my primitive is a cuboid, I define it as a unit cube centered at the origin. Right? What does it do for me? Well, I can write down the vertices, for example, right? This is 0, 0, 0. This is 1, 0, 0, right? And this is 0, 0, 1, and this is 1, 0, 1, right? And likewise, I can write down the backside. Let me just do one more face just to show you along 1. So this is 0, 1, 0, and this is 0, 1, 1, and that is that face. Now you know that you can do for oops, bad one, right? For all of these. So vertices are known, right? I can label the edges now 1, 2, 3, 4, and I can write down my solid as we had done in the representations earlier, right? F1 to F6, right? E1 to E8, E12, sorry, and V1 to V8, right? All of this can be written down, and since it's a small, simple object, you cannot make a mistake, right? You can check if you have made a mistake, right? So that's what we do. We start with what we call as a canonical shape, or a generic shape, a starting point, which is a unit cube centered at the origin. So now the user wants to create the piece here, right? So let's say I call my cuboid as my first primitive, P1, right? So how do I start with a cuboid that looks like this and get a cuboid that looks like that? Any thoughts? How can we do that? How do I go from a cuboid, which is a unit cube centered at the origin, to something that is located far away? So let's assume that this is the origin reference frame. Then how do I get this? First, of course, is translation. I can take this cube and translate it there, right? So this is a translation operation, right? And I can get my cube to sit there. Then, if this is still 1, and let's say this is 10, and this is 5, I can do a scaling operation, right? I can do a uniform scaling, which will give me the desired size and shape of the cube at the desired location, right? So there is a translation and there is a scaling. Of course, for a more complex example, you could also have had a rotation, right? To get a part that looks like this, right? If you want a part that looks like that, you can locate it there, scale it, and then rotate it, and you will get the part that you want. So the point I want to make is that you have a primitive and you have to transform that primitive. The transformation, we are not going to spend too much time here. I'm just going to tell you this, right? Can be seen as just a matrix, right? A 4x4 matrix where this is the transformation, translation transformation, Tx, Ty, Tz. This 3x3 matrix here is the rotation matrix. This is a universal scaling constant, and these are some other type of transformation which we will see later, right? And the matrix here will give you the scaling for along a specific coordinate. So if I, instead of this being 1, if it is 10, then I will get some scaling along that, and so forth, right? This, when it is multiplied by the coordinates of a vertex, will give me the new location of these coordinates, right? And so I pick a primitive and I pick a transformation for that primitive. Now the transformation is a matrix like this, but the interface you have, right? You can do it with your mouse and have the system calculate what this transformation matrix is going to look like, right? Because you can drag the thing there, you can look, pick an edge and move it and stretch it, right? And pick an axis and rotate it. So all that is, on the interface, and the system can calculate the corresponding transformation from all the inputs that you have given, right? And therefore, you have this situation now where I have P1 associated with a transformation. Just 1 second, let me just kill this. Okay, so there is a associated transformation which involves a stretching along the x-axis and a smaller stretching along the y-axis, right? And z may stays as 1. Here I have the same primitive P1, but a slightly different transformation where, I have a stretch perhaps along the y-axis and on the z-axis, but not along the x-axis. Likewise, for a cylinder, it is defined as a unit cylinder centered again at the origin here, right, of unit radius and unit height. And we haven't done this, but take my word for it, and we will try and do this a little later when we talk about curved entities. We can write down a B-rep for this just like we did for the cube by hand and ensure that it is always correct, right? And then there is a transformation. So in this case, it may be a stretching along the z-axis and a translation. And so that is a T3 on a primitive P2, which is the whole. And that completes my construction. Okay. So what have we done? What we are saying is that you have your primitives, right? And the primitives all have a B-rep associated with that for a canonical case, right? A generic case, unit cube centered at the origin. But by a suitable transformation, I can scale it, shift it, rotate it, move it wherever I want and get the primitive of the size I want. Right? So that's this primitive transformation T1. So you do that, you pick the same primitive and do a different transformation, pick another primitive and do some other transformation, and then you pick the two operations and you're done. Right? So that's why the number of inputs we said is 3 primitives and 3 transformations and 2 operations, therefore 8, which is still, very much more concise than this. Right? Now, all this is fine only if what can happen? That I'm given primitive P1, T1, right? So I'm going to call this as A, as we did originally. Okay. So now the problem is, likewise, I'm going to call T2, P1 as a solid B. Okay. So now the question is that I know the boundary of A. Right? This is my notation to say this is the boundary representation of A. Okay. I have done this on all the 8 vertices of the block. I know the connectivity and other things from this representation here. So between these two, I can calculate the boundary of A. This is known to me. Likewise, I also know the boundary of B. So the question then that is to be asked is that given boundary A, boundary B, the only thing that remains is that how do we find the boundary of a Boolean combination of A and B, right? That is the next question that we have to address, because if you can answer this question, then at the end of this process, not only is the user having a very convenient way of describing the solid, construction of the solid, but because you can do this, the system can automatically give you the boundary representation of this object here. And that's all you need, right? That you construct it the way it is convenient to you, and the system has the representation that it wants for further manipulation and computations that it needs to do. So CSG tree plus this step here, right, will take care of your construction of solid models. So this is straightforward. There's nothing more to say about the CSG tree. You just have to pick the primitive, rotate it, scale it, and then, combine it the way you think it should be done. And the input from the user is over. And then this happens in the background inside the computer. Sorry, this happens inside the background in the computer. And so that needs to be studied now. Okay, so let's look at this problem now. Let me So sorry. Anyway, I think I'll just leave it here. That's the question I had posed, that given BA and BB, find boundary of A star B, right? Now, I want to draw a very simple case first, right? And then walk you through the solution, and then make some remarks about the solution. So let me say that this is my solid A, right? And so when I say I'm given boundary of A, what do I mean by that? So boundary of A, this is a 2D point set. How do I represent a 2D point set by its boundary? By its edges. And therefore, let me label this as A1, A2, A3, and A4. So I have E1, E2, E3, E4 ordered in this way, but instead I can just write this as A1, A2, A3, A4, A1. Right? That takes care of the orientation. So this represents my boundary of A. Right? Now, if this were to be a 3D point set, you know, I can write down the boundary of that also as faces, right? So we will come to that in a minute. In this, I actually drew this rather small, but it's okay. I place another solid, which looks like that, right? And again, I do some labeling: B1, B2, B3, B4, B5, B6, B7, right? And therefore, the boundary representation must look like this to be consistent, right? And therefore, boundary of B then is B1, B2, B3, that. Okay. So now the question is that I'm given this, right? And I want to find boundary of, let's say, A union B. Right? So how do I do that? How do I find the boundary of A union B? What do I mean by A union B? By A union B, I mean that it is the set of points which belongs to both A or B, right? I shouldn't say both. So this is by my set theoretic definition from Boolean algebra that we have studied. This is the boundary of the set of all points that belong to either A or B, right? So points belong to A or B. So I want you to think and tell me, right? How would you, can you give me an expression or the boundary of A union B? What should it be? What I want is the boundary of that, because that's my B rep for the final part, right? And the way we write it down, let me just introduce it here, and we'll have to repeat it again in the next class. Let me. So I'll give the answer here, right? And you will see that in the answer, we have got some strange looking terms, but just look at the English interpretation of this. What this says is the elements of boundary A that are outside B and the elements of boundary B that are outside A. Okay, let's just focus on that. I think I positioned my drawing slightly badly, so I need to go up a bit. Let me see how well I can manage this. Okay, so I think the only way I can manage this is by writing the result here. So boundary of A outside B plus boundary of B outside A. Okay, so let me just try and do that by hand for you, and then we will discuss how this can be done by the computer. So the elements of boundary A that are outside B. So I'm just going to draw them, and you can see that I have drawn it correctly. Right? Those are the elements of the boundary of A that are outside B. Okay? I hope you agree with that. Now, I will take the second expression in my answer, which says the boundary elements of B that are outside A, and I have these elements, and I mind you that I'm also keeping their orientation. When I say boundary elements, it also includes the boundary elements direction, also orientation, as I pick it up from the part. Okay. And so that then is your result. Okay. So this object that we have got here, right, is the result that you are looking for, namely boundary of A union B. Now, some of you, if you have put some thought to it, you could have come up with an answer by saying that every time I hit an intersection point between the two boundaries, I toggle, and I will get the correct result, right? Now, which is true, but what we have here is more like an algorithm that can be implemented. Why do I say that? Because in 2D, right? Oh, sorry, 1 second. Okay, I think I'll just cover this and then we will stop. In 2D, right, my set A, right, is a polygon, right, or a face, right? That's my set. The set is this whole face or the whole polygon. Boundary of A is nothing but set of edges, or I have not covered it here right now, but they could be curves as well. Right? 3D, my set A will be a solid, right? Like a cube or some other shape. And boundary of A will be nothing but faces. Correct? Here edges are with orientation, and here faces are with orientation, namely the normal. The reason why I make this distinction here is that this result that I have written here, right, it does not matter whether the boundary of A is an edge or a face, and it does not matter whether B is a polygon or a solid. This result will work. What I mean by that is that instead of this 2D case that we have here, if you had the 3D case that we want to solve, let's say, for example, some object which looks like that, right, then it will work exactly the same way. Right? All I have to do is the elements of the boundary of A that are outside B and the elements of the boundary of B that are outside A, assemble them together, keeping the orientations as I picked up from the two respective parts, and that will be my result. Okay, I'll stop here, but let me just also flash the result for the other two, and we will pick it up from there in the next class. Yeah. Okay. And we will pick it up in the next class with a quick recap. So we'll meet on Wednesday, and depending on what these people want to offer, if they have any instructions to offer, then I will work around that. Otherwise, maybe I will teach for 1 hour, and then any questions or queries on the lab can be taken over after that. Okay, I'll stop here and let you go, and we'll see you on Wednesday, where we'll take up questions that you may have on the material covered today. Okay. Thank you very
Yes,
much.
sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.